You guys did a body swap, like your minds are in each other's.
That is correct. I am Spock.
And I am T'Pring. Now that you know, you can likely tell the very clear differences in our mannerisms.
Yeah, totally.
Welcome to the General Order 1 podcast, where we're discussing the Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I'm joined by my longtime friends and fellow nerds, Ben.
Hello.
And Jason.
Indeed.
Today, we are discussing Season 1, Episode 5, which is entitled Spock Amok. The summary of the episode I read online was, "It's a comedy of manners when Spock has a personal visit in the middle of Spock and Captain Pike's crucial negotiations with an alien species." So it's a comedy of manners, I thought was an interesting phrase. So anything we need to recap from the last episode before we dive right into this one?
No, but I did notice that there was a recap at the start of the episode, and has that happened previously? Have we had a previously on Star Trek Strange New Worlds previously?
Oh, I just assumed we had. I guess I haven't been paying that close of attention. Jason and I are also watching Andor, and they definitely do a recap on that, so I just kind of took it for granted.
Yeah, I thought they had before. It didn't surprise me, but
normally,
yeah, maybe I just haven't paid attention either. But it struck me that we did kind of a recap of the season so far at the start of this episode. So
the one thing that I took away from the recap that will come up in this show is from the pilot. La'an mentions that she already knew Una, and that Una was the reason that La'an joined Starfleet. So they were friends before this started, which comes up in this episode.
Okay.
So the episode opens with a Vulcan religious ceremony, and they're kind of standing around in this dirt circle, I guess you could say. And Spock is there and some other unknown Vulcans, and T'Pring is there in some sort of, ceremonial dress. And I did note that T'Pring is looking super hot right now. So this is a little out of character for her. And it comes up, obviously, that this is a dream. And so Spock is dreaming about his fiancée. So,
I'll just say this is another in a long line of scenes where we see that the Vulcans are very ritualistic. They have, a lot of different rituals, and these, they're playing these bells and chimes, and it gives them kind of this rich culture. But it always seemed a little at odds to me with this society that's so devoted to logic, that they have, these very they're almost like you said, they're like a religious ceremony. And I suppose logic is their religion, but it feels a little bit of like there's a dichotomy there a little bit. I don't know.
No, that's actually a good point. I didn't think about that. I mean, what is the point of ritual except to reinforce your already existing beliefs?
Right.
Which is a kind of opposite of just strictly logical, strictly to the point.
Yeah, I feel like these are the kind of folks who are at home on Sunday watching the game, but instead they're just doing a different ritual.
Yeah.
I take the Vulcans a little differently. I think they pride themselves on logic, and that's in their culture, but they struggle with it all the time, and they kind of have to focus on it. So it's not like it's 100% they're robots. It's just that's something that they take pride in as a species.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know a lot of the background of Vulcans, but they're definitely not.
They weren't always these slaves to logic. They were ruled by their emotions in the past. So maybe a lot of this is just tradition and ceremony that's survived from ancient Vulcan when they weren't so logical.
Well, that's where this episode opens, right? Is that so? Spock and T'Pring are essentially talking about getting engaged, and all of a sudden T'Pring notices, she points out his ears, and the camera pulls back, and you see that Spock has human ears, and all of a sudden he has to fight his human self, right? What was the ritual called?
I don't remember. Yeah,
it had a specific name. I don't remember, but it's a ritualistic Vulcan combat that he has to do, and he has to fight with himself. So in this, you see his Vulcan half fighting with his human half, and his human half. Actually, did you guys notice that human Spock looks almost nothing like Vulcan Spock? Like they almost look like totally different people.
Well, they clearly just they had him out of the makeup, so he didn't have his hair treated. His hair wasn't done the same way. I mean, they took the actor and threw him in the scene instead of dressing him up as Spock. Yeah,
I guess I didn't realize that there was that much difference between the actor and the Vulcan Spock. So yeah, the difference obviously is the ears, the haircut. He doesn't have a bowl cut, and his eyebrows are not nearly as pronounced when he
Right.
is a human. So there's a very serious difference between the actor that plays Spock and the Vulcan Spock. There's a visible difference, I should say.
Yeah. And there's a lot of fan service going on in this scene, which is not it was welcome. I enjoyed it, but I mean, we talked I think our previous episode about you had asked me if I knew the episode titles or if I had to go look them up, and I insisted I'm not one of those guys that knows the title of every episode and has all of them at my fingertips. And yet here we go again. I'm going to talk about a title of an episode as if, I think people they're restraining their credulity a little bit at this point that I'm not an uber Star Trek nerd that has all this memorized. But there is a famous episode of the original series called Amok Time. And God, I'm not doing myself any favors here. I'm pretty sure it's
just
the first.
Just own it.
I'm pretty sure it's the first episode of season 2. And it deals with Spock having his pon farr and having to go back to Vulcan to marry T'Pring. And there's, hijinks ensue, and he ends up having to fight Kirk in a ritualistic combat with these weapons so this whole scene is a callback to that original series scene, including the fight music is the same as it's a very famous piece of like battle music from the original series that plays here unaltered. It's the same music, so they're pulling those nostalgia strings real hard here. But the weapons are the same, the ceremony's pretty similar, and we get the same pretty famous fight music. That
it's called Caliphate. Do you know how I know that?
How do you know that?
Because of Cable Guy, the movie Cable Guy. When they're at medieval times.
Yeah.
Jim Carrey brings him out on the floor, and he starts like miming that music. Dun, 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 dun.
Wow. Yeah, it's pretty famous. It's been used in Futurama. In Futurama, it's the national anthem of whatever Zoidberg's people are. I can't remember the name of those.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Yeah, it's like stand for our national anthem, and that's the music that plays. So.
Well, I've got good news, Ben. Well, I don't know if it's good news or bad news, but you are exactly right. Amok Time is the season 2, episode 1.
That's bad news.
No,
I'm in too deep.
Just own it. We've got a Star Trek podcast. There's no.
Okay.
No
I guess I should stop fronting at that point.
All right. It's clearly
it's too late for me.
This episode's called Spock Amok, so it's clearly like
This is definitely a callback to that. 100%.
So Spock basically fights his human self. Vulcan Spock fights human Spock. Human Spock loses, ends up on the ground. He's just about to be killed.
I will say, as this scene was happening, the main thought running through my head was, this is a little on the nose, guys.
Yeah.
Which we'll come back to later. I felt vindicated in that belief later on in the episode. So.
Right before the killing blow is going to be struck, Spock wakes up, sits up in his bed, covered in sweat. Clearly, it was all a dream. He gets out of bed, walks over to the mirror in his quarters, and gently runs his hands over his ears to confirm that his Vulcan ears are indeed in place.
But here's how insecure our bro Spock is here. Not only does he checks both ears individually, like
really?
Just checking one like doesn't reassure him. He has to turn his head and check the other one too.
So there's a clear theme here that runs through the episode of Spock battling his human half. So this is just setting that up. So the next scene, we see the exterior of the Enterprise. And the Enterprise is at Starbase 1. After the battle with the Gorn in the last episode, the ship was clearly pretty damaged, so they are getting some much-needed repairs. And Pike tells Spock that they have a diplomatic mission and that he is going to need some help. but because so the crew is getting shore leave while the ship is being repaired. T'Pring is actually visiting Starbase 1 because their last visit got short because Spock got called back into service as part of the pilot. I did note so that they're in Spock's quarters on Starbase 1, and T'Pring and him are, he's getting some romantic. He's going to make a romantic gesture for T'Pring, and he's setting out some wine, and he has these 2 wine glasses that were like kind of like this geometric glass, and they were like the most funky looking and impossible to drink out of glasses. Did you guys happen to notice that?
Yeah, it was form over function to the nth degree with these.
There's no way you could have drank out of those. I mean, they looked cool, but I mean,
it's going to splash all over you if you try to drink out of one of these things. But he's very, very particular about how they're placed.
Yes.
And we as the audience clearly are supposed to think, okay, dude, don't be so anal about it. That, you're literally like getting your ruler out and measuring down to the millimeter, like where these things should be placed. Like, who cares? It's wine glasses, dude. Just set them down and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert, he was wise to be that careful because it wasn't careful enough.
T'Pring shows up and they're having a conversation, and it's alluded to the fact that T'Pring's job is that she is essentially a therapist and she rehabilitates criminals. And so what she does is she uses Vulcan logic to show criminals the error of their ways. So her job is dealing with the lower dregs of Vulcan society. They have a kind of a back and forth, and they're debating, the status of their relationship because Spock got pulled away to come back on the Enterprise. And T'Pring's line is, she says, "We must prioritize our relationship." And they kind of go back and forth. And I just my note was that Vulcans sure have a weird way of flirting with each other. I mean, because they're just so logical.
It's all business.
Isn't that essentially what flirting is the opposite of business? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And somehow they have to make it work. So they just have these weird conversations that you try and appeal to your significant other's form of logic. It's funny.
One of the first things she does, though, when she enters the room is correctly position the 2 glasses.
And yeah, right.
She walks up to them like immediately and is like, "Oh, no, these are not placed properly," and she readjusts them. So, however careful Spock was, it wasn't careful enough.
I don't know. To me, that seems like a red flag. Like, if that's what you're worried about in your relationship, like, you're going to have a lot bigger problems down the road. Yeah, right.
But I think that the sense we're supposed to get here is that T'Pring's not an outlier.
Right.
This isn't T'Pring as a drama queen who has to have her glasses placed just so. It's that Vulcans are. And he's not Vulcan enough because he didn't get the glasses positioned.
The next thing we see is Pike, Spock, Uhura, and Admiral Robert April in the meeting room. Admiral April was the admiral in the pilot that called them all back into duty. So...
Original captain of the Enterprise.
Right. Was this the meeting? I got the impression this was the meeting room on the Enterprise, not on the Starbase, right?
I think it was, just because, we just saw Spock on the Enterprise. I didn't get a good sense of that, though. It seemed like maybe it was on this. I don't know.
Where Spock and T'Pring were was not on the Enterprise. I know, because he makes mention that those are the quarters that they gave him. Anyway, the reason I bring this up is because this meeting room that they're in is huge.
I think maybe then it's supposed to be on the Starbase.
And it's kind of weirdly decorated. So I was thinking if it was on the Enterprise, this is total overkill. Like that one point, I think there's a sextant sitting on, and a globe and a couple. And I was just like, these are crazy things to have on a starship. So I'm hoping this is supposed to be.
Yeah, it makes sense that it's not. We'll get to the B plot later with Una and
La'an. Yeah,
La'an, but their B plot involves the Enterprise basically being deserted. So. This must be on the Starbase.
Did you notice Pike's uniform in this scene?
Yes, and it's right out of the gate. Yeah, this is again, we're doing a little more fan service. This is a callback to Kirk's alternate uniform from the original series. It shows up a couple times. Okay, so this is where I don't know exactly. I believe that it shows up a few times in the first season, but it's only a couple. And then in season 2 and 3, it's a lot more common, is my recollection. But
I don't
instead of
remember
the
this uniform
typical,
at all. So
yeah, it's instead of the typical Starfleet uniform, Kirk gets this like wraparound kind of thing that he wears from time to time.
oh, that right. Well,
And
the one thing that I noticed was his uniform is green, and I don't think I've ever seen a Starfleet officer wear a green uniform.
Kirk's is green as well.
And it has like leather shoulders and sleeves, like it's not one consistent fabric.
Yeah, it's a little more fancy than Kirk's was. Kirk's is just
Yeah.
fabric, but it's got some gold accents and stuff. And I don't know what the truth is, but the scuttlebutt was like, Shatner wanted to have his own costume that, nobody else had or something. Or the captain should have a fancy thing that no one else does. Or
He was just being a diva.
maybe. I have no
Oh.
idea if that's true. But
Huh.
that's kind of been one of the rumors in Star Trek fandom for a long time. Was like, oh, Shatner had to, couldn't have the same uniform as everybody else. Captain's got to have something special.
Okay, so
But,
this uniform is a throwback.
Yeah, it is. But we've seen that in some other instances. In Next Generation, Picard has his own uniform for. It doesn't show up a ton, but there's some episodes where Picard has a uniform different than the others. He's got like a jacket instead of a.
Sure.
It's yeah. So
This one just stood out because it had leather on it. I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't totally out of place. It was just different than we've seen before.
yeah.
Would this be because he's on leave, or they're
I think
off the ship?
the implication here is because he's going to have to do some diplomatic stuff that they dress up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
It just to look more official, to separate themselves from the regular crew, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and we'll see what this isn't the dress uniform we saw before that
Right.
Uhura had on, so we'll see what the context is going forward. In the original series, there didn't seem to be any particular occasion where this was used. It just was sometimes Kirk felt like wearing the wraparound, and sometimes he felt like wearing the regular uniform. So I don't know. Is it easier to hide a girdle under this one? Maybe. I don't know.
Admiral April informs them that they're going to have to do some diplomacy with a race that the Federation is attempting to bring into the fold. The Rongovians is the name of the race. As far as I know, that's a new race we have not seen. But they arrive early, and they will only talk to Pike. They will not talk to the Admiral. So La'an the messages all of them and says, "Hey, the Rongovians are here early. Should I bring them in?" And so she brings them in, and there's kind of a funny scene where La'an doesn't know if she should go or stay, or she doesn't want to be involved. And she says, "Sir, I should go do the security things."
Yeah.
And then she kind of like leaves because she doesn't want to be involved, because the Rongovians at this point they're pretty rude.
Well, and she's clearly not comfortable in this diplomatic setting, but
Yes.
she also doesn't know if, am I supposed to stay here and guard these people? Or she just has no idea what her role is. And so,
Right.
yeah, it's a little awkward.
And the Rongovians arrive, and they're confused. They see Spock, who's clearly a Vulcan, with all these other humans, and they ask Spock, like, "Are you're in Starfleet? Like, so who's in charge? Is it the Vulcans? Is it the Federation?" And Spock has a good answer that they all have a voice, and that everybody in the Federation gets, their say, and that it's not run by one particular race. Which comes back in the future, which is, so it's worth noting that the Rongovians have some trepidation about joining the Federation, I should say.
Yeah. Which, this is always how the Federation's presented, and it does seem how it actually is, but and I know, like, this is getting a little meta, because probably the main reason for this is just, costume and makeup budget. But the Federation is clearly dominated by humans.
Oh, right, sure.
Like, there's more humans involved than any. I mean, and I think there's made mention at some point in some of the Star Trek canon that, humans are just more likely to join Starfleet, but that the Federation has the representation is equal, but Starfleet is mainly a human organization, just because humans are more like, let's get out into space than other races are. But
actually, that's a good point. You're right. It probably does have more to do with budget than anything. 'Cause
Yeah,
like
I
in
mean,
lower decks, there's a lot more non-human races, because it's easier to. You can
right,
animate
exactly.
people
You don't
versus-
have to do
4
5-hour
hours of
makeup
makeup,
session to have an extra walk by that's an alien. So, but yeah, if you were looking from the outside, you'd be like, I mean, sure, you say it's all equal, but it sure seems like humans are calling the shots here. Like, your capital's on Earth, and all of the people in charge seem to be humans, so...
Yeah, I kind of assumed that it was a human thing, or at least started with humans, 'cause I guess because of the lack of budget, maybe. But I guess not. It's just a coming together of...
the Federation's just the UN of space, essentially. I mean, anybody can join, but yeah.
Okay.
The only other thing that we should note in this is before the Rongovians arrived, they show video of the previous interaction with the Rongovians with a different race, and they were extremely rude to whoever they were meeting before they were meeting the Federation. So the Federation or the Enterprise crew is a little bit nervous about meeting these Rongovians because they're just kind of jerks.
Yeah, and there's no mention of how they got this footage. Is Starfleet intelligence really that good, or was it the Tellarites? I think they're talking.
Yeah, Tellarites.
Did the Tellarites just go, hey, we struck out, but here, you guys, we'll give you the recording so you can watch the game film and try and improve where we failed. It was weird that they had this.
Yeah, good. And it was like an overhead shot too. Like it almost looked like it was kind of like subterfuge that they had spy. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm thinking Starfleet intelligence has the Tellarites pegged. They've got video in their capital.
The next scene is in sickbay. We see Chapel, Ubenga, and Ortegas preparing to leave for some shore leave because again the ship is being repaired, so they have nothing to do on the ship.
And I'll say that's a nice little bit of continuity. We're used to in Star Trek seeing, particularly egregiously in Voyager where, decks 10 through 50 are decompressed and the warp drive's offline and, life support's hanging on by a thread at the end of the episode. And then the next episode, they're just cruising along like nothing ever happened. So it's nice to see, hey, yeah, we had this major encounter and took a lot of damage. We're going to be out of action for a while.
So let's see. Ortegas asks Chapel, I believe, if she's excited to see Lieutenant Dever, who was apparently Chapel's old boyfriend. Chapel kind of defers a little bit, and then Ortegas also asks her about an old girl friend, possibly. So there's a tiny hint here that Chapel she definitely has history with this guy, but I think they're perhaps implying that maybe she's bi. I looked it up online. There was nothing crazy about her character, being outed or anything like that. But I took note that she had at least history with both genders. So
yeah, and I think it's kind of an aside.
Yeah,
and you can look at this a couple different ways. You can look at it as, okay, they threw this little aside in here as, we're going to throw a little bit of a bone to the LGBTQ community. Or you can look at it as this cynical thing of, okay, like, we're going to give you a nod, but it's going to be this little aside that we never talk about again. And then so we gave you something, now shut up. But I guess I'll take it in the spirit it was intended, that they're trying to make the cast and the crew of the Enterprise a little more diverse than it was in the past. And
I mean, Star Trek is, if anything, has always been diverse and forward thinking. So
yeah, and it's said in such a way that it's clearly a total non-issue for these characters. Right. So we see that in the future we're more enlightened. That's one of the nice things about Star Trek.
Yeah, it's more about how I guess Chapel has relationship issues. I think that's kind of what they're trying to establish. Yes. She has like commitment problems or needs.
Yeah, the focus of the conversation is not who she's having relationships with. That no one cares about.
Yeah.
It's just that her relationships aren't going.
So the three of them end up in the transporter room, and they're preparing to transport down. And I think one of them makes mention of, because Ortegas and Una are there, and they make mention that, oh, you guys aren't going on shore leave. And I think it was Ortegas that says, oh, they don't shore leave, they shore stay. And it comes out that Una has a nickname, and the nickname is Where Fun Goes to Die. So there's the implication here being that the top brass is just all stuffy and boring, and they don't even take shore leave.
Right. And I just, that's not a nickname.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's just a
It's
slap in the
something people
face.
say about her, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's no way someone walks into a room, two cadets pass in the hall like, man, you'll never guess where Fun Goes to Die told me today.
Yeah, right.
There's no way they're using that as a name for her. So, come on.
After they beamed everyone off of the Enterprise, I think Una at one point leans over and says, "Have you heard that nickname for me?" And Chief Kyle just totally pretends, kind of
Case is
like looks
done.
the other way.
No, not at all.
Yeah, totally stammers like, "I don't know what you're talking about," but clearly it was well known. So
Yeah, the crew is definitely they've got her pegged. She's the one that's fun.
the next scene is a super quick scene between Spock and T'Pring, and T'Pring basically guilt trips Spock for missing their dinner date because he got roped into doing diplomacy with the Rongovians. So this is essentially the second time now that duty has trumped their relationship.
Well, he's about to go have dinner with her, and she's prepared it, but he says that he can't do it. He has to go do further work, right? That's how I got interpreted.
That was no, they didn't have dinner prepared. At the beginning, he mentions, "Hey, yeah, we're going to have this time together, but I have this duty I have to perform first. It shouldn't take long, and I'll be back, and then we'll have dinner together."
But she has a meal set out. Like the camera cuts to the meal and the wine and
Yeah.
Right. So while he
uneaten.
was gone doing
Yeah.
this duty that she wasn't thrilled when he's like, "Hey, I got to do this little thing. I'll be back in an hour." Kind of. I mean, he doesn't say a time, but the
Yeah.
implication is this isn't going to take long, and I'll be back. She's not thrilled that he's leaving at all, but she's like, "Okay, but then we're having dinner when you get back." And he says, "Yep, absolutely," and off he goes.
Yeah, but
and then
where he goes is not work, right? So this is
no, it is. He goes to the initial meeting. They're having a planning session about the negotiations with the Rongonians? Is that
Rongovians, yeah.
Yeah. They're having kind of a strategy session for how the talks are going to go, and then they show up and say, "All right, we're starting now," which is unexpected. So he thinks he's going to this little 1 hour kind of strategy meeting, but it ends up being the full-fledged negotiation.
Oh, is the implication here that it caught them off guard because the Rongovians showed up early?
Yes, exactly.
Ah, okay. So the only other thing I took away from the scene is that T'Pring is worried that his half-human self will make them incompatible because she's full Vulcan and he's half Vulcan, half human. So perhaps that will cause a problem in their relationship. And that comes up later, but she mentions it here as part of this missed dinner that, she essentially kind of calls him out. Like, you need to focus more on our relationship instead of on duty.
And this is definitely the first time in the episode where I feel like T'Pring is being pretty unfair. Not that she's upset, like that makes sense, but instead of just saying, "Hey, I feel like your Starfleet career is getting in the way of our relationship, and I'm not happy about that," she's specifically mad that he made a choice to not come back to dinner. And I was kind of waiting for him to say, "Hey, I'm in the military basically here. I can't always decide where I'm going to go. If I'm ordered to attend this meeting, I have to."
Especially by an admiral.
Right. So be mad. I mean, it's totally fair for her to say, "Hey, we're not getting time for a relationship, and I'm not happy about that." But to make it, you've made a choice to put Starfleet in front of me. I mean, I guess that's true in a way. Just by staying in Starfleet, he's making that choice. But it was almost like you could have come to dinner and didn't.
Yeah.
I guess he could have resigned his commission right then and come to dinner. But it felt like he didn't have quite the level of agency in this situation that she seems to think he did.
Oh, interesting. Well, after this, he goes to the bar. So I figured he was kind of trying to avoid her after this, but I guess it's just
she leaves. She says, "Hey, we're if you're not going to make this a priority, then I'm out of here. We'll talk later." And she leaves. So
okay.
And then that's when he kind of the camera pans over and he notices that she's made this whole meal, and he looks very crestfallen because he realizes what a big deal this actually is.
So the next scene is the intro litany. So we're 14 minutes and 15 seconds into this episode. So, I mean, we're almost, a third of the way through the episode and before we even get the intro.
Yeah, I was surprised. It
I
came
kept
on. And I
thinking,
was like,
did I miss it? Like,
right, and then it kicked in. Like, oh wow, like yeah, they really went deep into this one before we got the litany.
so normally, I mean, I usually skip the intro. I mean, I've seen it 100 times. So for whatever reason, I watched it this time, and I did take a couple notes on the. This intro is just absolutely gorgeous. Like, there are some really, really cool starscapes. There are some fantastic shots of the Enterprise in front of various
We are,
interstellar phenomenon.
you know, I would use a vulgar term here. You know, we're really watching the Enterprise closely.
I mean, I guess.
What is that supposed to mean, Ben?
The term I would use would be we're, you know, with our eyes, we are like undressing the Enterprise, I guess I would say.
Sure. It's very.
Enterprise porn, maybe?
I don't know if. I mean, I guess I'd have to rewind. I mean, if you look at, say, the Voyager intro or the Deep Space Nine intro or the Next Generation, I mean, they were cool. I mean, and you see, maybe they were products of their time. I just was watching this intro and just like, there's so many cool artistic shots. It's not just the Enterprise with like a black hole behind it or in a meteor field. Like, there's some very cool artistic shots of the nacelles and.
Yeah, I mean,
Anyway, just shout out to whoever designed that intro. It really stands out. Good job. So we got to get moving along, man. We got a lot of episodes.
Yeah.
So the next scene, like we briefly mentioned before, is you see Chapel in a bar talking to a guy. So the implication here is that this is Dever that we were that La'an mentioned earlier. So they are in a bar, I assume, on the starbase, and I made a note that the costumes in this bar scene are amazing. At one point, the camera pans past this lady that walks by in this red and gold, like shimmering dress that just looks amazing.
Yeah.
And all the characters in this are all outfitted in non-Starfleet uniforms. So, I mean, I know we've mentioned it in the past episodes that the costumers on this show are just really knocking it out of the park.
Right. And yeah, everyone's dressed very, you know, this is clearly like the black tie bar.
Right.
Everyone's dressed elegantly. I hope there's just like, you know, the pub somewhere on the station where you can dress down a little bit and relax, because this is not that place.
Does denim not exist in Starfleet? It must.
Right. Yeah. Where's the bar where you can wear jeans?
Seriously.
Hopefully that's you know, that's down on the lower decks, and that's where all the cadets are hanging out.
So what we see is Chapel talking to Dever, and you know they haven't seen each other in a while, and he starts to talk about us. I'm doing quote fingers here, you know, and basically, you know, what's the status of our relationship?
Yeah, and she is 100% not having it.
No, because she wanted to leave. She was like, "Hey, you know, we could stay here and have dinner, or we can go have fun." And he was like, "Well, I want to talk about our relationship."
No, Devers needs to learn to read the room. Like,
yeah, really, right?
So obviously not into this. And he just keeps plowing forward with it.
So Chapel basically gets nervous, and she says, "Oh, shoot! You know what? I gotta go check on my friend." And she walks over and she talks to. So she goes over and sits with Spock. So the implication is that Spock is, after being crestfallen for letting T'Pring down, he is now drinking his sorrows away in this bar.
I do want to point out one line this guy says. I mean, he's super cringe. Like, he says, like, "You look hot, like fire hot."
Yeah.
She says, "Thank you." And then he goes, "What about me?
Yeah.
Aren't I fire? We're two fires."
Oh God.
This is where I like noticed this was like a light episode. This is like a humor kind of laid back episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not fishing for compliments. This guy's, you know, dragging a net across the bottom of the ocean for compliments.
I don't know, man. I mean, Chapel is smoking hot. Like, you got to just like.
I mean, he just straight up says, "Hey, compliment me too."
Yeah, like you're lucky she's talking to you, dude.
Yeah.
So Chapel goes over and sits with Spock. They kind of basically have a discussion about relationships. Chapel calls him an idiot for not understanding his wife's needs. At one point, she kind of smacks him in the head.
Yeah.
And Spock says, "That's not a human gesture I am familiar with." So Chapel proceeds to give him some relationship advice. I got the impression from this scene that the chemistry between Chapel and Spock is pretty solid, right?
Oh no, we're telegraphing
a
relationship between them.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah,
Oh
like,
yeah.
the very close of that scene,
Hmm.
like she looks down and kind of bats her eyes at him, and like it was like I noted the chemistry, like it was
She
full on. Like this isn't like I'm trying to help my friend.
no, she's flirting with him hard.
Hard, yeah, okay,
But she's done it a couple times already in the show. This
right.
is this
That's
is
it.
not subtle.
It
Oh,
was a
speaking of
callback to the
which,
original, right? Yeah.
yeah, speaking of which, this is the conversation where yeah, she asks him about, why are you feeling down? He tells her about his dream, which I thought was I'm
Oh
like,
right.
wow, like not she's flirting with him hardcore, but Spock is also confiding things in her. I don't think he would tell anybody else.
Oh, that's a good point.
So we're seeing kind of both sides here. His guard is way down with her as opposed to everybody else. He just says, "Yeah, I had this dream where I was, my Vulcan and human halves were fighting," and Chapel's response is, "Boy, you Vulcans don't do subtle, do you?"
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, "Yes, thank you, exactly. That was way super super on the nose." And yeah, I was glad to see that the writers called themselves out for that.
Well, the interesting thing is there, I mean, he's laying everything out, talking about his fiance and his relationship, and she's telling him that he's stupid. And then at the exact same time he's talking about his fiance, she's flirting with him.
Yeah. No, there's the implication here is that both of these people are definitely attracted to each other.
Okay, I'm not
I
sold on
don't
that.
know
I
if I
think
get the impression that Spock is into her, but she's definitely into him. But we'll see. Jason, what do you think?
no, it seemed odd, especially on Spock's end of things. He seems to really want to impress. I mean, he's engaged. That
Okay.
the whole episode is about his relationship. So, that would be interesting. Yeah.
So we see Una and La'an walking the hallways of the Enterprise. They are still on the Enterprise, not taking shore leave. They're basically kind of like giving each other a pep talk about, being the boring, stuffy shirts of the ship. And they're like, oh, there's nothing wrong with liking work, right? And Una says, I was really looking forward to redoing the duty roster. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, all right.
Yeah, I think they got you pegged.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, why do they think you guys aren't fun? I don't know.
Yeah, La'an also says, she likes being in the Enterprise alone, and it's just you and the gentle thrum of the warp core. It's like Christmas.
The scene ends with La'an getting a security alert at an airlock, so they have to go investigate, to make sure nobody's trying to break in or whatever. And they open an airlock, and they see that there are just two kids there, messing around. And they come back later, but just worth noting that they're just two kids having a good time. So Spock and T'Pring are up next in their temporary quarters on the starbase, and
Yeah,
Spock.
specifically, Chapel has told kind of the resolution of their conversation is Chapel tells Spock, hey, if you're concerned about her not thinking you're Vulcan enough, then you need to, make a Vulcan gesture, meet her on her terms.
So they end up doing. Spock suggests a Vulcan soul sharing, and he says, "We can truly understand each other. We will see through each other's eyes." So they're going to do. I assume this is kind of an extension of a mind meld that perhaps you can only do with other Vulcans.
Yeah, and we haven't encountered this particular Vulcan ritual before, so
it's not super important, but
no,
they decide to take their Vulcan relationship to the next level. And shockingly, it goes awry, and they swap bodies. So T'Pring is now in Spock's brain, and vice versa.
I do have questions though. Like, if this is this Vulcan soul sharing thing, she doesn't react as if this is a really unusual request or this is taboo or anything. So yeah, wouldn't you do this? If you're engaged to be married and this was something you could wouldn't you have already done this? It seems like something that would be.
That's a good point. Wouldn't that be the basis of your entire relationship?
Right. If you could, see each other's souls, wouldn't you do that as part of getting engaged? Or if it was, well, no, you only do this if you're married or something like that, then you would think she would say, well, whoa, we can't do that. We're not married yet. Or it just seemed odd that this was something they could do and hadn't chosen to do yet.
Yeah, it seemed to me more like couples counseling for Vulcans. Like, she kind of scoffs at it, like she's like,
Yeah.
seriously, of soul sharing, and so that's maybe it's like something that troubled Vulcan marriages do.
Maybe it goes awry a lot, and that's why they don't like doing it. Who knows?
Mm.
So they basically get swapped, and they realize that this is going to cause a big problem. So they try and undo the process.
They seem really surprised, though. So that's
Yeah.
the thing. It doesn't seem like this is
Yeah.
oh well, this is something that we knew this could happen. They seem like I've never heard of. I think they specifically say they've never heard of this occurring. So it's a little, we don't get ever any explanation of why this happened, which I suppose is better than a hand wavy one. So
it doesn't really matter. Yeah,
I think the writers are just like, hey, just go with it, and I'm fine with that. I can do that.
There's a lot that we have to just go with in this episode.
Right.
So
there's a lot you have to just go within this show. I mean, there's that definite suspension of disbelief. So, all right. So just moving along real quick. They do spend, so that the camera cuts a couple times and you see them trying different things. They are trying to undo this because they both have work to do. So it cuts and T'Pring says, well, there's one more chant I want to try, but we might need a gong, which I thought was an interesting line. So apparently she mentions that they've been at this for hours and they can't undo it. So whatever they've been trying, they've been really working to switch bodies back.
This is where things are going to get confusing because it's quote unquote T'Pring who says that, but it's Spock at this point.
Yes, right. All of my notes are as the person saying them, but it's really the other person. But
yeah,
he says, I think it's T'Pring says, Spock, I do not like hijinks. We're in agreement. It appears that hijinks are the most logical course of action.
Yeah, they both basically come to the same conclusion. Like, we've got nothing left, so we got to get up to some hijinks to get this undone.
This is just hilarious. I'm loving this episode so far, just because it's so tongue in cheek. So.
Agreed. We'll get to I have a take at the end. I'll save it.
Yeah.
The next thing we see is Pike's quarters with Admiral April. He mentions that the Rongovians are not happy and they don't want to talk to Pike. They only want to talk to Spock. Sorry. So Pike goes to T'Pring / Spock's quarters and just basically mention like, hey, Spock, you're getting called in because they don't want to talk to me. And that's clearly a problem because they have swapped bodies now. And so
there's a lot of referring to themselves in the third person, mistakenly referring to the other person. Yeah, they're having trouble talking about their identity because it's switched.
Pike's line is, "You're pretty much all that stands between us and the Rongovians allying with the Klingons or the Romulans. Hell, maybe both." So this is a big deal that they need Spock to come and do his Spock thing, and he can't because he switched bodies. So they decide to tell Pike that they've switched and that it's going to complicate the negotiations. They thought maybe they could get away with just, passing it off, but now, everybody else is involved, so they can't.
This is my favorite moment in the episode because I was like worried, like they did a body switch episode with two people that are basically the same, like their personalities are the same, and they say, "I am Spock. Now that you know, you can likely tell very differences in our mannerisms," and he's like, "Yeah, totally."
Yeah.
It's like now that you know that we've switched, like it must be obvious, right? And you said they're completely identical.
Yeah, and Pike's just like, "Oh yeah, you bet."
Mm-hmm. The next thing we see is La'an and Una, and they are interrogating the kids, just trying to figure out what they were doing. Before they go into the room, they basically negotiate who's going to be good cop and who's going to be bad cop. So,
which is interesting because you generally you do that when you're interrogating the same person. You're gonna, we're gonna, pair off against this person and keep them off balance because one of us is being nice and one of us is being mean. But they split them up, so it's just like, we're gonna do this like social experiment where you be mean to the person you interrogate, I'll be nice to the person I interrogate, and we'll see who gets results or something.
Ultimately, La'an gets to be bad cop. Una gets to be good cop. It's not super. This is the B plot. It's not super important. But what is important is that the kids basically mention that they were playing Enterprise Bingo, and that's why they were in that airlock when they got caught. And Una, the scene ends with Una asking La'an, what's Enterprise Bingo? I've never heard of that. And if you remember back in the first episode with Uhura, where they haze her into wearing her dress uniform to Pike's quarters, Ortegas mentions Enterprise Bingo right there as well.
Yes, she does.
So this is apparently a thing they do on the Enterprise. So we'll get into actually, let's cover that right now.
Well, real quick though, let's note the interrogation piece. Both of them are extremely successful.
Yes.
Luan has this cadet absolutely terrified and sobbing by the time she's done with her. And then we see that Una is now this cadet's best friend.
Yep.
They're laughing, they're chatting, everything's super nice. So, yeah, apparently if you need good cop, bad cop, we know exactly who to talk to because these guys are great at it.
After this, they cut away from the kids, so it's just Una and La'an again, and they are discussing Enterprise Bingo. And La'an does some research, and they determined that it's a game performed by ensigns and lower. And if you look, she has on her pad, her iPad or whatever, she has a list of the things that are required for Enterprise Bingo, and so I'll just read them real quick. Use a transporter to reflavor gum, phaser stun duel, turbo lift 2-floor shout challenge, set the universal translator to Andorian, gravity boot hang challenge, medical tricorder challenge : Vulcan marsupial, food replicator challenge durian fruit, sneak a tribble into the transporter buffer, sit in the captain's chair, EV suit challenge : unsanctioned spacewalk, and the last one is sign the scorch. So,
I have to admit, I did not pause it there. I thought about doing it, but I did not. So it's fun to hear what these are. I didn't see them in the episode.
There's actually, I started to type them out from the pause thing. I'm like, I bet you this is on the internet. So I just Googled it and they were all there. But there's some good things here. And so that's actually what they do next. So Una's line is, well, if this is what passes for fun, I'm happy to be fun's funeral. And so La'an says, well, I guess we could try and understand it. So you see them attempting the gum challenge. La'an is on the transporter pad, and she said her gum has lost flavor. They beam her out and then beam her back, and she says, oh, spearmint. So apparently if you transport with gum in your mouth, it regenerates the flavor. I don't know.
Well, I'm hoping that the challenge here is you're slightly altering the pattern when you transport to put the flavor back in the gum, because if transporting with gum that's lost its flavor gives it its flavor back, that has some scary implications for transporting.
Really?
Because the whole point is that you're supposed to be unaltered by the process.
Okay.
So
well, maybe the gum is altered, not the human.
Maybe, but yeah, that flies in the face of what we know about transporting, which is thing goes in, thing comes out exactly as it was.
I think you're reading way too much into the gum challenge.
Well, you've also got the whole, philosophical conversation you have about the transporter,
right?
And that, does it kill you every time you do it?
Do you have a soul? Because if you do, and you
right, because that's why they make a big deal about, no, we're not just like we're not recreating your atoms on the other end. We're literally moving your atoms from one place to another so that we're not just killing you and making a copy every time.
Yeah, it seems like this show is playing with the transporter a little bit more, like maybe kind of expanding what we know about it, like the whole Mbenga and his daughter using the transporter buffer.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe they're playing around with it.
They do the turbo lift 2-floor shout challenge where two people stand on a turbo lift, and you count to 3 and you both yell a floor, and you see what floor it decides to go to, and that person wins. They do the stun challenge where they both get phasers and they aim them at each other on the lowest setting, and they shoot each other, except Una chickens out at the end and doesn't shoot La'an.
She says wait,
fun.
Like she loses her nerve and Luan does not and just shoots her.
So that's just a kind of a silly B plot, and it was fun. It was fine.
It is. I have to say that the 2-floor turbo lift challenge is the gimme of the list.
Oh, for sure.
Every other one involves either breaking some regulations or being in somewhere you're not supposed to be or doing something you're not supposed to do. This one is literally just, you're on the turbo lift and you each shout a floor. There's no risk involved with that
Right.
one.
I would think like voice recognition software would be better in this world, you'd think. I mean, you'd think the elevator would be like, wait, who's the higher ranking officer? We'll just go with that. Or,
Oh,
I'm
interesting.
sorry, you guys both said 2 different floors. It's just Alexa, apparently.
It's poor design. Send the Enterprise back to space dock.
What we see next is T'Pring getting a call from her associates, one of her associates, and basically saying, hey, one of your criminal clients that you're working to help us rehabilitate, we need your help bringing him in. But clearly T'Pring is not T'Pring. T'Pring is Spock. And so Spock, as T'Pring, says, I'm not feeling well. And her associate says, only you can do this, T'Pring. So now Spock is forced to go as T'Pring and do her job, so this is perhaps some of these hijinks that are going to end up happening quickly.
They have to
here.
do each other's jobs.
They do.
Right. And yeah, so they're definitely getting to see the world through each other's eyes. I think that we have a bit of a missed opportunity here where, Spock was asked to choose between his relationship and his duty. And this would have been T'Pring being asked to choose between her relationship and her duty. I would have been interested to see what her choice would have been if it had been her instead of Spock.
Yeah. All right. That's a good point, actually. The next thing we see is Ortegas and Chapel near a lake. They are, I don't know where they are. Are they?
They're on the station. Yeah, they mentioned
They
that the
have a lake?
habitat. Yeah, they mentioned that the habitat has fly fishing. So yeah, they've got this like domed habitat somewhere that's got a lake.
So they are hanging out at this lake. You see Ubenga doing some fishing.
Really cool shots of fly fishing.
Yeah, this was a nice moment for Umbenga. We just get to see him having a good time and
like close-ups of the little like spinner thing,
the lures.
Yeah, like the this is some.
No, it was cool. It's a nice little character moment for him.
So Ortegas and Chapel are just hanging out, and they see T'Pring walking up. They don't know that it's Spock. Chapel walks up to T'Pring, and she's a little bit nervous, and she says, essentially, I hope I didn't cross the line. I gave Spock some relationship advice. Not aware of the body swap. So she basically tries to get her to use it as a relationship opportunity. That she was just explaining what she's trying to justify it to T'Pring that she's not crossing the line, I think is what I took away from that.
Yeah.
So now we cut back to Spock and the Rongovians sitting at the table doing the negotiation that Pike and Admiral Robert April were not allowed at. I did note that Uhura is sitting at the table. She's not participating. She's just, I assume, doing stenography or whatever. It's
doing unclear what her role is here. She has very little to do in this episode.
She sits there, but yeah, she doesn't. I don't think she has any lines. But
yeah, the only character with less involvement in this episode than Uhura is Hemmer, who's not in it at all.
The Rongovians ask, what is the logic of an alliance with a federation whose interdependence merely dilutes the cultures that comprise it? So they're asking Spock, who's really T'Pring. So I think this is a moment for T'Pring to realize, okay, well, Spock is diluted because he's not 100% Vulcan. The Federation is diluted because they're not 100% human. Is that necessarily a bad thing?
Right.
The thing that you see Pike and Admiral April are in the room. They are sitting back and they are only observing. So they can hear, and they're kind of like looking at each other like nervous, like, how is this going to go? And at one point, Pike stands up and he walks over to interrupt. And the Rongovians...
T'Pring gives the answer, which is basically, this is a huge sacrifice that I've made. I mean, she's giving her perception of what Spock is doing. And she says, yeah, it's this huge sacrifice I've made to serve Starfleet and have kind of given up interaction with my own people. And she's basically confirming what the Rongovians just asked, which was, hey, does this kind of dilute your culture? And she's saying, yes, it does. And Pike looks at Robert April like, oh my God, I can't believe they said, that quote unquote Spock just said that. And then, yeah, he can't help it. He's got to intervene because this is going off the rails.
Right.
But so we see that Pike is definitely impulsive. Robert April is a little horrified that he's going to interject when they're not supposed to. So Robert April is a bit more of a rule follower, it seems, than Pike is. Pike's a little more of a fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy. Here we kind of see that while, in some ways Starfleet is supposed to be a military-like organization, in other ways it's very much not, in that you can kind of just do whatever you want sometimes. So the admiral in charge clearly has told, the implication is he's been told not to say anything, and he just does. Despite the fact that, Robert April says, Chris, what are you doing? And he just goes forward with it. So you can just do whatever and ignore your commanding officer if you want to sometimes, I guess.
He walks over to the table and he says, oh, can I interject real quick? And the Rongovians are like, no, we don't want you here. And he was like, oh, I don't want to talk to you. I want to talk to Spock. So he looks at Spock and he tells Spock how important he is to the Federation and being away from his people. I mean, he's like, I understand that that's hard for you, but it is very important that you are doing what you do. You have a very important job. So
talking to Topanga.
Yeah, right. So that's the rub here, is that he's telling T'Pring how important Spock is and how vital he is to this crew, and he acknowledges that he is making a sacrifice by being away from his people and his fiance.
And he basically says, I can't remember exactly what the words are, but he, in a nutshell, he says that Spock is the best of Starfleet, that he embodies all that makes Starfleet and the Federation good. So something like you're the best, the finest example of the good of the Federation. It's high praise.
So at this point, the Rongovians are kind of on board. They've changed their mind a little bit. And the scene cuts next, and we're back with Ubanga fishing at the lake.
Sorry.
You want?
Yeah, just Pike. He apologized after he says this to Spock. He turns to them and says, I'm very sorry. Forgive the interruption. I apologize if I've offended you. And their response is, no, we're actually impressed that you would stick up for your crewmate that way.
We cut back to the lake. Yes, agreed. And this is all part of the theme that goes into the Rongovian switch at the end, which we'll get to. So
yeah,
we're at Ubanga's fishing at the lake. Chapel and T'Pring are basically now discussing the criminal that T'Pring is supposed to bring in. T'Pring's line is, "My sympathy for those without logic is why I'm here," because this Vulcan criminal has lost his logic essentially, and has gone off the path and become a criminal.
Yeah, and I love that the Vulcans they don't have she's a cop basically, but her role isn't like investigation or tracking these people down. It's literally to just talk them out of being a criminal,
and talk them back into logic, essentially.
Right.
So the criminal basically insults Spock. She says, "Oh, you're the guy, or you're the girl that's married to that half human, half Vulcan. Like, you're not even a true Vulcan. Like, who are you to tell me about Vulcan ideals, right?" He says, "You defend Vulcan ideals with one hand and insult them with the other." So,
yeah, and he basically says, "I decided to give myself up until you showed up, and you've offended me basically with your non-Vulcanness. So now screw it, I'm not going back."
So T'Pring / Spock says, "Whoa! You really got to stop insulting my choice of significant other." He chooses not to stop, and T'Pring Spock just full on decks him in the face and literally knocks him out.
Yeah, he gets sucker punched bad.
Yeah. I mean, as far as Vulcans go, I mean, you couldn't really insult them any more than that guy did, so he kind of had it coming.
Yeah.
At this
Yeah,
point,
and it's and it's not even just that he's talking about Spock, who's the one who reacts. So
yeah, Spock says, like, perhaps we should keep the details of how exactly we captured him between us. My response was a tad human.
yeah,
So
that
that
was
would be my...
definitely not the Vulcan method to
they're not
just
they're not
knock
gonna
the dude out.
they're not gonna notice he has a gigantic black eye when they're
Right?
in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sure,
He
whatever.
he fell.
It
He hit
doesn't
his head getting into the squad car.
We cut to sick bay. We see Chapel and Obenga are now back on board the Enterprise, and they are attempting a Catrick transfer. They basically take a ground up sea urchin paste, they rub it on their foreheads, which it says it makes it uncomfortable for anything else in your brain than your normal brain waves. So they're just trying to undo this transfer medically now.
Yeah.
And
so the hand wavy explanation for how this happened we now get for reversing it.
Yep. At one point Chapel looks over at Obenga and goes, "They're going to nerve pinch us for this, aren't they?" And then they, essentially turn on the electricity or turn on the system,
which turns out to be excruciatingly painful, and they never told them that part.
Right.
That seems like a little bit of a violation of your Hippocratic oath to not inform them, hey, by the way, this is gonna hurt like hell,
right,
before they turn it on.
The last scene it's just Chapel and Spock, and he's kind of sitting on the edge of the medical bay, and you assume he's just kind of recovering a little bit, and Chapel walks over and advises him to be honest with himself. So she's continuing to give him relationship advice.
And pretty good advice.
Yeah. Well, her advice is to be honest with himself, not be honest with her, but be honest with himself, essentially saying, you need to give yourself a break.
Well, and he says, she says, you need to be honest. And he says, well, I of course I'm honest. I'm a Vulcan. We can't lie like you humans can. And she says, no. I mean, be honest with yourself. And he looks a little introspective at that. So she's pegged it. Yeah, I mean, her advice to him through this entire episode is good advice. She's being a very good friend.
So we see Spock and T'Pring back in their quarters, wherever. And he takes her advice and he lays out his feelings and concerns. His line is, "On our world, I was forced to prove my Vulcanness. In Starfleet, I'm accepted for who I am." So he's telling her that he doesn't feel that he may be a good mate for her because of his half human side.
Well, and he straight up says, "I'm afraid that I'm not Vulcan enough for you."
Right.
Which is, I mean, that's a pretty big admission for a Vulcan to admit fear, I think.
I mean, I think that's, is that him being honest with himself? Is him finally admitting that's why maybe he was kind of lying to himself before, that it was something else. So anyway, he has this conversation with T'Pring and he lays out his feelings. He bears his soul to her and says, here's what my concerns are. And it works because they end up kissing, and the scene ends with them laying down in the bed. And then who knows? So
that's probably all that happened.
I'm sure they just took a nap.
Yeah, they just cuddled and slept.
So I think the takeaway from this is be honest with your significant other.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe this was maybe I dreamt this, but I could swear that at the cut from that scene, they lay down. As they're laying down, we have a pan of the camera up to the ceiling. So we pan away from them up, and then it fades to black. And I could swear that as that fade happens into the next scene, that the door chime goes off.
Oh wow, I don't remember that.
So maybe
I'll have to give it a rewatch.
Yeah, watch it again, and we'll remember to mention this in the next episode. But I could swear the door chime goes off as if, they're getting interrupted again, and we don't know whether he answered it or not.
Okay, all right. Well, let's. It comes up a little bit later in the episode, so let's see. The next thing we see is Uhura and Admiral April and Pike in the negotiating room, and they're kind of looking at the next steps of what they're going to do after this last interview they had between Pike and the Rongovians, where they were sort of on board. The Rongovians walk in and they say, "Why should we ally with your Federation?"
And they've now switched back to saying they'll only talk to Pike, right?
That's a good question. All I
I
know is
think
they walk
that's
in and
what.
they're willing to talk to Pike at least now, where they weren't before.
Yeah,
So this
They
is
were impressed with the way he defended Spock, so yeah, they wanted to talk
right.
with him again.
Good point. So I wrote this is another of Pike's great speeches. I mean, the writers are really knocking it out of the park for him. And his line was easy. You shouldn't. Why would you want to turn our enemies into your enemies? We're just a few years clear of the Klingon War. The Romulans are out there biding their time. Who knows what species will piss off next? And Roberts kind of gives him the side eye, like, "What the heck are you doing? Like we were so close, and now you're
yeah.
just telling him not to, right?" And the Rongovians walk out. They're, the implication here is that they're offended, but Pike kind of looks at Robert April and he says, "I'm playing a
Well,
hunch."
they get up, and the leader of there's two of them through this, and one of them's clearly the leader, the other one's his attendant or something like that. Um, Pike finishes his speech saying, "Yeah, from your point of view, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to join the Federation." And then, yeah, they stand up, and he just says, "Thank you, Captain," and then they walk out.
So Pike explains a little bit of what he was attempting to do to Robert April, because Robert April's kind of gobsmacked at this point. Like, you suck at diplomacy.
Yeah, he says, "You may have just cost us, an alliance that would ensure our security. What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm playing a hunch."
He says, the Rongovians were rude to the Tellarites, reasonable with us, and deeply logical when talking to a Vulcan. Maybe they're just looking for someone to take their point of view. Radical empathy. And so my note here is that this is why I like Star Trek, is making you think of things outside of the box, right? Like, not everybody thinks like a human. Not everybody thinks like a Vulcan and is horribly logical. Like, this is the sci-fi theme, like, at its essence, of taking your preconceived assumptions about people or communication and flipping them on their head.
Yeah, and also it's this is a common thing that happens in Star Trek, where the alien of the week is, they take a trait and assign it to these aliens, and they've taken it to as far as they could possibly go. So these are the empathy guys who have taken empathy to its extreme conclusion.
Oh, so like the Ferengi take
The Ferengi are greedy. These are
and
guys are empathetic. The Vulcans are logical. There's
Klingons are violent.
yeah. I mean that episode
Okay.
in Next Generation where there's the aliens that only talk in they only speak in metaphor, and
Darmok and Jalad at
yeah,
Tanagra.
right. So they take this, and if you think about it for a second, you get to like, okay, this society doesn't work, but it doesn't need to. It's there again. This is the morality play / philosophical thing that Star Trek does. And they're using this as a tool to put this idea of empathy under a microscope and look at it from all angles. So you can't think about it too much of like, how do these guys work if all they're doing is just
Right.
If you're trying that hard to see the other person's side, you have no side. If two people are operating that way, then
Oh, right. It's a feedback loop.
right. But again, we're just they're a reason to examine this idea of empathy and seeing the other person's point of view, which ties in with everything that Spock and Pring are going through. So yeah, that's definitely the theme of this episode.
Yeah, I mean, again, and that's why I'm on board, because I love the way this ties in and the way it flips your preconceived notions on its head. So
right.
Sign me up.
Yeah, I like what you said, Baker, about how there's sort of like a misunderstanding usually with these species. Like, they misunderstand them off the bat. Like, they seem really angry at first, and so you have to kind of dig a little deeper into them and like find out the way they operate, and then you learn more about them, not being your first impression. I love this type of thing in Star Trek.
We definitely get the sense I don't think they have much to worry about with these folks allying with the Romulans or the Klingons, by the way.
Well, so what happened, the final part of this scene is that you see out the window of this meeting room, you can see the ship that they had brought, and all of a sudden the ship flies the Federation flag.
Yeah, and they mentioned this is one of the few contributions Uhura has to the episode, is that earlier they had mentioned that they brought this solar sailor ship. And
like a very old ship that they only use for diplomacy.
Yeah, it's mentioned they only use it for diplomatic events, and it's like it's not representative of their usual fleet. But
Really
then,
cool
they
ship.
mentioned that it's a really cool design, and they mentioned that that's kind of the sign they give. They know that if they fly the flag of the other, organization they're dealing with, that means that they're in agreement with them.
So Pike's plan worked. His hunch worked.
He says, "I think we have a new ally."
Yeah. So the next and almost last scene is we see Una and La'an, and they're outside of the Enterprise. They're walking on the hull of the Enterprise. They are attempting to sign the Scorch, which is one of the items from Enterprise Bingo. La'an is very excited. She says, "We did it. We broke the rules."
Yeah.
So they explain what signing the Scorch is. So Una says, it's the oldest unreplaced piece of the Enterprise's hull. It's supposed to be good luck to sign it. And so they both walk over and they crouch down and they sign it in chalk. And you see that there are already like several names have already signed it. And right about then, after they sign it, you see the Rongovian ship fly overhead and the old solar sails unfurl. And it's kind of this cool looking gold ship. And it looks, and it sounds really cool. I had my headphones on when I was watching it, and it sounds really neat. And
I will say, like, the moment when we see, Uhura and Pike and April are in the conference room or whatever, and they see the Federation flag go up on the Rongovian solar sailor ship, we get the classic dun 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 dun. We get the Star Trek fanfare. I'm pretty sure that's the first time we've heard that in this show. There's there's a bit of a it's worked into the main theme a little bit, but it doesn't play the whole thing. It's changed around. It's remixed basically for the main title theme. But here we get the full thing when the Federation flag flies. So it's nice. It's a nice moment.
So Una and Lon basically they look up at the ship, and I think they say it was good luck. So signing this ultimately was good luck because things worked out with the Rongovians. So they are happy to have broken the rules.
Little bit of Star Trek, science-y thing here that bugged me a little bit. I mean, this is so nitpicky, but they go out on the hull. They don't need environment suits because there's some kind of force field around the entire Enterprise providing an atmosphere.
Well, they're in space dock. I mean, that's
why. Why do they have this? It seems like a lot of energy to use to provide an oxygen atmosphere around the ship for a reason. Why?
Well, I just kind of assumed it was because they're at space dock and it would make it easier for humans to work on the hull.
I guess, but we've never seen that particular ability of Starfleet before. And when they caught the ensigns playing Enterprise Bingo earlier in the episode, they were putting on environment suits to go out there.
Oh, good point. Yeah.
So anyway, maybe they just didn't know that force field was there, and Una did. But
the next thing we see is a super quick scene of Spock and T'Pring in bed, and Spock is shirtless and sweaty post coitus.
No, it was just a really, really intense cuddle session.
So Spock, now that they have unswitched bodies, Spock mentions that he had to punch Barjon to bring him in, and T'Pring's line was, "Well, having met him, that is logical." So she doesn't really have a problem with what happened, and they have clearly made up, and they are on good terms again. And then the episode ends. The final episode is Chapel and Ortegas are having a drink at the bar. Ortegas asks how things went with Dever. Chapel says, "Oh, I told him how boring he was, and we essentially broke up." And Ortegas basically says, "Oh, maybe you should try that early in a relationship next time. Honesty." and then Star Wipe, and we see the credits. And I wrote down that I think honesty is really the theme of the episode. Being honest with the Ronkovians, being honest with
Yeah.
Spock and T'Pring.
We get a moment to drag Devers a little more, though, because she specifically mentions his crappy poetry as one of the reasons that
That's right. Yeah.
she's cut it off with them.
Yeah.
And we also end with another little, like, oh, we've got a thing for Spock moment, because
Yeah, I was wondering what that was. Because I wrote it down. I was like, she asked him, or he would. She says, it would have to be the right guy.
yeah,
And
she
then there's,
asks
like,
her
this
what
awkward-
are you looking for in a partner, and she's like, oh, it would have to be the right guy, and she kind of gets this
What?
little, and you're like, okay,
Oh,
she's
nothing.
she's
Yeah.
got a thing for Spock. Okay.
I didn't know that until now. So thanks for actually talking about that. I've learned something.
Yeah.
It just seemed awkward to end on that note.
It was kind of a weird ending. It would have been a great ending if they ended with, the Una and La'an on the hull. And
Yeah.
the ship flies by and then Starlight. But whatever.
Well, we
I
hammer
don't
home
care.
again this whole theme of you got to be honest with yourself, and
Yep.
so Chapel is forced to come to terms a little bit with her feelings that she hasn't really acknowledged. So,
All right, we've gone a little bit long, so let's power through the end here. Ratings. You want to go first, Ben?
I'll say that last episode we talked about, I can't remember the title of the episode, but the one with the submarine episode with them fighting the Gorn.
Memento Mori.
Memento Mori, yeah, which I gave a 6 to. If you read off the synopsis of that episode, I would, before I watched it, I had read the synopsis, not of like the whole thing, but just the like little blurb about what this episode's about. And I thought, oh man, sign me up. This is going to be a great episode. I'm ready for it. And yeah, it ended up being, it's okay, but it could have been way better. This is the total opposite. If, when I read the synopsis of this one, I'm like, okay, body swap, here we go. This is going to be super lame. I was ready for this to be a bad episode. It's my favorite episode of the season so far. I'm going to give this one an 8. I really, really enjoyed it. I think it just speaks to that, execution is almost as important as the idea behind the episode. This idea is pretty cliche and cringy. We've seen stuff like this a million times, but it worked well to hammer home that theme of the episode of seeing things from someone else's point of view. The acting was really good. There weren't any, the writing was good. There was a lot of good little subtle references to things when they weren't so subtle, like Spock's two halves fighting. The writers called out that, like, yeah, we know this was a bit on the nose, but it's what we needed to do for the story. I really liked this one. I had a great time with it.
Jason, you want to go next? You want me to?
I can go real quick. I'm very similar to Ben. I totally loved this episode. I'm thinking this is kind of where I'm starting to really fall in love with the show, at least the characters more. It's a chill, low stakes, tongue in cheek. Like the writing is so funny. And so we focus really on the characters, and I started Spock. I wasn't really sold on before, but I grew to really appreciate his character in this. Yeah, so I loved it. I'm going to be generous because I'll give it a 9. Because I just understood what they were going for with just sort of playing around, having fun, and being legit funny. I laughed out loud multiple times, and I don't do that in Star Trek very often. So
really like, you talked about Spock getting some expansion here. I like that they're letting Spock be a little bit human at times. There's a couple times in this episode where he smiles or he smirks, or his face is pretty expressive, which isn't something we're really used to seeing from Spock. Leonard Nimoy played it like this guy has a poker face 24/7. There's a couple instances where we saw some kind of emotional reaction from Spock. Actually, one of the more famous ones is in Amok Time, this episode this one's referring to, where in that fight with Kirk, he thinks he's killed Kirk, and he's very crestfallen about this. At one point, when they're leaving Vulcan, they say "live long and prosper," and he says, I shall do neither. I have killed my captain and my friend. And it's like, oh, geez, okay. So he will not live long or prosper because of this. So the implication is maybe he's going to kill himself or something. It's like, oh my God, like, and then he sees that, there's some trickery in the episode and Kirk's actually alive. So then, Kirk walks into the, walks onto the bridge and Spock says, Jim, and has this big smile on his face. And then, and then immediately like has to bury that, like, oh, I shouldn't have reacted that way. And everyone kind of like laughs at him for, and this Spock is able to emote a little bit and it not be something that's like a complete, 180 in his character. It's nice to see that they're letting his human side out a little bit.
Yeah, and it's like you said, we've seen this kind of set up, the body switch thing. It's so cliche, but they really put a unique twist because of their personalities are so similar. It's kind of hard to tell.
Right.
And they poke fun at that, but they actually utilize the characters in an impressive way. Like you actually get what they're going for. So yeah.
Yeah, and just because it's cliche doesn't mean it can't be done well, and they did it well.
Yeah.
I agree with what you guys were saying. When I was going through the list of episodes, I was like, oh man, I forgot about that body swap episode. This is gonna suck. But no, I'm with Ben. This is my favorite episode of the season so far. This is Star Trek at its best, I think, is when you have one underlying theme that runs through, 2 or 3 different plot lines. It all ties together. It's all cohesive. There's not a lot of, suspension of disbelief. The characters were great. We talked about it for an hour and a half already. 9 out of 10. I loved it. This is a great episode. It is worth noting that in the list of episode ratings, at least that I found online, this is the second highest rated episode of the entire show. So
wow.
We are probably pretty close to being in agreement with the rest of the
them. Yeah, but yeah, they killed it. The writers on this one absolutely nailed it.
All right. Well, that's all I got. We've been talking for a while. We will be back with episode 6. All right.
Just before we sign off, just a quick housekeeping note. I accused you last time of alienating our 2 viewers by referring to Star Wars instead of Star Trek. I was wrong. We have exactly 2 viewers according to our analytics on the various podcasting apps. So
excellent. I'll take it.
Our 2 viewers are sticking with us.
Are they viewers?
We
or
appreciate
are they
you.
Listeners?
They're listeners. That's true. Yeah, see, now I've lost them. They're gone now. That's it.
That's a debate. We could talk about that all day.
Let's table that debate for now.
Yeah.
All right, signing off.